The day I decided to trust Tyler completely, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't expected. It was a strange, intoxicating feeling to let someone so completely into my life, as though sharing every password, every conversation, and every memory would somehow bring us even closer together. We had been dating for over a year and everything felt right. Every laugh, every quiet moment, every glance. It all told me I was safe with him. He was my person, the one I could be vulnerable with. So one evening over dinner, with a small shy smile, I slid my phone across the table, unlocked, and told him he could look through anything he wanted. All my social media accounts, my texts, even my emails, everything was open to him. He looked surprised at first, even a bit flustered, and then laughed it off with that confident grin he always wore. "I don't need to do that," he said, nudging my hand back to me. "I trust you." But I insisted, saying that I wanted him to feel secure in our relationship, that he could know everything about me. And eventually he took my hand and murmured, "All right. If you want full transparency, I'll give you mine too." In the days that followed, we exchanged every possible password. He knew my Netflix, my Instagram, and even the one app one used for budgeting. And in return I knew his email, his Facebook, his phone lock code. There were no secrets between us now, and it felt liberating to think we could live without walls. To me, it meant we had taken that next step, where we both stood fully exposed and willing to hold each other accountable, free from doubt. For a while things were perfect. I had never felt so comfortable, so in tune with someone. There was an ease to the way we shared everything. It was like Tyler was my other half. And I believed more than ever that this was how relationships were supposed to be. He was my best friend, my confidant, my everything. But then, a few months later, I started noticing something different about Tyler's behavior. It was subtle at first, so subtle I almost ignored it. He'd be on his phone more often, quickly clicking the screen off whenever I entered the room. Or he'd have sudden work emergencies that took him out late into the night. I tried to shake off the unsettling feeling building in my gut. After all, he had my passwords. He could see I wasn't hiding anything. It wouldn't be fair of me to accuse him without proof. One evening after a long week, he went out with his friends, claiming he needed some guy time. Something in his voice sounded off, a bit too rehearsed, but I forced myself to smile and told him to have fun. Later, while scrolling through Instagram absent-mindedly, I stumbled upon a story from a girl named Rachel. Rachel was a mutual friend of one of his friends. Her stories often showed snippets of her life, her interests, her friends. But this time it showed a picture of Tyler in the background at a bar, laughing with her. I felt a strange pang. Why would he leave out that detail? He had never mentioned Rachel before, even though I knew practically every friend in his circle. My stomach twisted, but I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was a casual acquaintance. Maybe he didn't think it was worth mentioning. Still, the unease grew. A week later I decided to scroll through his emails, just to put my mind at ease. I hated that I felt the need to check up on him, but something deep down whispered that I wouldn't find peace until I knew. And there it was, several emails from Rachi, a nickname I had never heard before. Each email was casual enough, but there was an undercurrent, something playful in their words, something that spoke of inside jokes, of nights spent together. There was no evidence of anything truly inappropriate, but the context left me feeling hollow. I finally confronted him one night after he came home. "Who is Rachel?" I asked, my voice trembling more than I'd expected. He laughed it off, telling me she was just a friend, someone he hadn't thought much of because they'd only met through work projects. I tried to believe him, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine, and my heart knew better. Over the next few weeks I watched him. I paid attention to the way he shielded his phone when he texted, the way he seemed to guard his screen when I was nearby. His behavior told me everything his words didn't. One night, while he was asleep, I opened his phone. I knew I shouldn't have, but I felt like I was drowning, and the only thing that could save me was the truth. What I found wasn't explicit. There were no confessions of love or secret photos. But the messages between him and Rachel were intimate in a way that hurt more than if I had found something purely physical. She called him Ty, a nickname he'd never let me use. She told him how much she missed him, how he always knew just what to say to make her smile. And he replied with the same tenderness he once reserved only for me. In those quiet words I saw the betrayal. It wasn't about what he had done physically, but what he had taken from me. the sacred trust, the openness I had offered. He had exploited my willingness to trust him completely, turning my own honesty against me. I waited until the morning, barely able to look at him as he got ready. I could feel my heart breaking with every minute that passed. But I kept silent, letting him go about his morning routine, pretending I didn't know. I wanted to confront him, to scream, to ask why he'd done this. But instead I watched him kiss me on the cheek and say he'd be home early, just like every other day. That night I didn't wait up for him. I packed my things, leaving my shared keys on the kitchen counter. I left a note, just one word: goodbye. As I walked away, I realized that trust, the kind I had given him so willingly, wasn't something to be taken lightly. I had let him in completely, and in return he had shown me that not everyone values honesty the same way. Trust, I learned, should be earned, nurtured, protected, not given away freely to someone who sees it as nothing more than a chance to manipulate and betray. I didn't feel free that night. I felt broken, yes, but wiser. Leaving him wasn't as clean as I had hoped. I thought that by shutting the door and putting him in my past, I could walk away, seal off the pain, and start over. But that wasn't how it played out. It was like some part of me was still trapped back there, tethered to him by all those shared memories and promises, left haunting the apartment we'd made our home. My mind replayed the last night we'd spent together, his familiar laugh, the way he'd reached for my hand. Now each memory felt warped, like I was discovering my own life had been a lie. In the days that followed, I fell into a routine that felt empty and mechanical. Friends offered support, but their comforting words washed over me without much impact. I didn't want their sympathy, as kind as it was. I wanted answers. I wanted to know why he'd done it. Why did he need her when he had all of me? I resisted contacting him. I knew it would do no good, that anything he said would be tainted by his half-truths and easy lies. But after a week, I couldn't stop myself. I sent a short message, no anger, no accusations. Just a question. Why? He didn't reply that day or the next. And maybe I should have been grateful for that. But it gnawed at me, the silence somehow worse than anything he could have said. By the third day, he finally responded, and his answer was as bland as it was devastating. "It's not what you think," he'd written. "Rachel and I were just friends. You know how close I am with people. I never meant for you to feel betrayed." That was all he offered. As though his casual friendship, his innocent intentions, could wipe away the raw betrayal I felt. Reading his words, I couldn't decide if he genuinely believed he'd done nothing wrong, or if he simply thought so little of my intelligence. Did he really think he could downplay it, make me question my own instincts? I sent one last text. "Do you understand that by saying that, you're trying to make me doubt myself?" I could feel the anger pulsing in my fingertips, my heart racing as I pressed send. He didn't reply again. And that was the true confirmation I needed. It was easier for him to ignore me, to disappear into his world of half-lies and friends he never felt the need to mention, than to admit what he had done to me. I felt a strange sense of clarity after that, though it was laced with a bitter edge. He wasn't the man I thought he was. He'd never been. The following week, I returned to the apartment alone, gathering the few things I'd left behind. As I walked through the familiar rooms, I found myself sifting through more than my belongings. I was sifting through memories, sorting out the truth from the illusion. The photo frame beside our bed still held a picture of us, grinning on a hiking trip we'd taken in the early days of our relationship. I remembered how he carried me on his back over a muddy patch, laughing as he teased me about my clean white sneakers. Standing there, staring at that frozen moment of happiness, I realized that even then he'd only shown me the version of himself that he wanted me to see. It was painful, acknowledging that the trust I'd given him was unreciprocated. I had bared every corner of my heart, my life, and my thoughts to him, and he'd taken them as though he was entitled to them, as though my honesty were a luxury he could enjoy but never reciprocate. That's when it hit me. Maybe he hadn't lied to me intentionally. Maybe he just didn't know how to be fully honest, because he'd never learned how to be honest with himself. He lived his life like an actor, shifting his character depending on who was watching, always hiding a part of himself, even from me. I left the photo frame behind. The days turned into weeks, and slowly I began to rebuild myself piece by piece. Friends invited me out, encouraging me to rediscover the parts of myself I'd neglected in the relationship. I started spending more time at the gym, picked up a few art classes, and even signed up for a writing workshop. Each small step was a quiet act of reclaiming the life I'd shared with him, a way to fill the spaces he had occupied with things that belonged only to me. But there were still difficult moments, days when I'd see something that reminded me of him, a song or a restaurant, and a pang of nostalgia would hit, uninvited. On one of those days, I decided to go back and read through some of our old texts. I wanted to remind myself why I'd fallen for him in the first place, maybe to understand what I'd missed or ignored. I thought it would give me closure, some final confirmation that it hadn't been all bad. Instead, as I read through our messages, I stumbled across a name I hadn't noticed before. It was buried in a conversation from months earlier, so casually slipped into a sentence that it hadn't even registered at the time. "Yeah, Rachel would love this place. I'll have to bring her here sometime." I read it again, feeling my heart twist. How could I have missed it? How many other names, how many other friends had he tucked away in his life, casually hidden under the guise of trust? I closed the messages, feeling a mixture of sadness and strange relief. He'd left clues everywhere, little breadcrumbs that hinted at his divided loyalties. And maybe in my eagerness to trust, I'd ignored them all. Months passed, and the memory of him slowly faded into something distant, a chapter of my life I'd left behind. I started dating again, cautiously, carefully, making sure that this time I held something back for myself. I kept my passwords private, my thoughts a little guarded. Not because I wanted to live in suspicion, but because I had learned that trust was not something to be thrown away so easily, nor demanded in full. It was a dance, one that required patience and a willingness to be open, yes, but also to protect oneself from those who would take advantage. And then one day, out of the blue, I received a message. It was from Tyler. "Hey, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much I hurt you. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know I've thought about you. I'm trying to be better." I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to respond, to ask him if he'd finally learned what honesty truly meant. But I knew that his apology was for him, not for me. I didn't need it to move on, to close the door on that chapter of my life. So I left it unread. As I walked away, I realized that in reclaiming my trust, I hadn't just protected myself from being hurt again. I had gained something even more valuable, the knowledge that trust, real trust, was something that had to be earned both by others and by myself. And in learning that, I had finally found the freedom I had once thought he could give me. With Tyler's apology left unread, I thought I had reached a true turning point, the final piece I needed to heal and move forward. And for a while that felt true. I threw myself into new projects, taking on work and even some travel opportunities I'd previously set aside. I began to rediscover what life looked like on my own, the quiet strength of independence I had almost forgotten in the haze of our relationship. But as much as I wanted to believe I was done with Tyler, his presence lingered like a faint but persistent ghost. It wasn't just about missing him or the relationship we'd shared. It was about the nagging sense that I'd been robbed of something intangible. Trust, I realized, was like a muscle, something that weakened when it went unused. And with Tyler's betrayal still haunting me, I found it difficult to open myself up again, even to the people who genuinely cared for me. One night, about a year after Tyler and I had broken up, I was at a friend's housewarming party. It was the kind of gathering where everyone seemed to know each other, and I felt strangely out of place among so many couples and familiar faces. I was nursing a glass of wine, half listening to conversations, when a man approached me, introducing himself as Ethan. He was tall and kind-eyed, with a quiet warmth about him that immediately put me at ease. We talked for a while about books, travel, work, and I found myself laughing, genuinely enjoying the conversation in a way I hadn't in a long time. Ethan had a way of listening that made me feel seen, as though he was absorbing every word with care and intent. By the end of the night, he asked for my number, and after a moment's hesitation, I gave it to him. It felt both thrilling and terrifying to imagine myself getting close to someone again, to let someone in. But as he walked away, I couldn't deny the flutter in my stomach, the faint glimmer of hope that maybe I could move forward. Ethan and I started seeing each other casually. He was patient, kind, never pushing for more than I was willing to offer. Our dates were easy and enjoyable, often spent wandering through art galleries or catching late-night jazz shows, where we'd talk about everything and nothing. Slowly, he became a comforting presence in my life. There were days I felt ready to take a leap, to let him in fully, but every time I tried, memories of Tyler would surface, and I'd pull back, cautious, unsure. One evening, Ethan invited me over to his place for dinner. It was our 5th or 6th date, and something about the invitation felt significant, like a test of how far I was willing to let myself go with him. His apartment was cozy, filled with mismatched furniture and stacks of books, the kind of space that felt effortlessly welcoming. He cooked pasta and we shared a bottle of wine, laughing as we recounted embarrassing stories from our childhoods. For the first time in a long time, I felt myself relax, as though I was finally letting go of the weight I'd carried since Tyler. As the night went on, Ethan asked me about past relationships, and I hesitated. He sensed my discomfort and immediately brushed it off, saying we didn't have to talk about it if I wasn't ready. But there was a gentleness in his approach, an understanding that felt genuine, and something in me wanted to tell him. I wanted him to know why I was so guarded, why I sometimes seemed distant. So I told him everything. I told him about Tyler, about the trust I'd given and the betrayal I'd endured. I talked about the feeling of being hollowed out, of losing faith in something I'd once held sacred. Ethan listened without interrupting, his face soft with empathy, nodding as though he understood every emotion I was struggling to convey. When I finally finished, he reached across the table and took my hand. "Thank you for trusting me with that," he said quietly. "I can't imagine how hard that must have been for you." In that moment, something shifted between us, a delicate but undeniable sense of closeness. It wasn't the type of trust that came from years of knowing each other. It was the kind that was earned in a single vulnerable moment, where words and silence met with equal weight. Over the next few months, Ethan became my anchor, someone I could trust in small, gradual steps. He never pushed me, never asked for more than I was willing to give, and slowly, I began to trust him in a way I hadn't trusted anyone since Tyler. It was different, though. This trust wasn't blind or unconditional. It was cautious, built on mutual respect and openness. And it felt stronger somehow because I had learned how to protect my heart, to give only what felt genuine and honest. One night, I woke up to find Ethan asleep beside me, his hand loosely curled around mine. I lay there, studying his face in the dim light, feeling a quiet contentment settle over me. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to guard myself, to hold back parts of myself in fear of being hurt. I was at peace, fully present, without the lingering shadows of betrayal that had once haunted me. As the weeks turned into months, Ethan and I continued to grow closer, building a relationship founded on shared values, open communication, and above all, a healthy respect for each other's boundaries. I learned to trust in a way that was mindful, allowing both of us the freedom to be ourselves without fear of judgment. It was a slow process, but with each step forward, I felt myself becoming whole again, reclaiming the parts of myself I had lost in the ruins of my past. One evening over dinner, Ethan asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Do you think you could ever trust someone completely again?" I looked at him, feeling a swirl of emotions that were both familiar and foreign. I thought back to the girl I had been with Tyler, the one who had given herself so completely, so willingly, only to be left empty and disillusioned. And then I looked at Ethan, at the man who had patiently waited as I rebuilt myself, piece by fragile piece. "Yes," I said softly, surprising myself. "But it's different now. It's not about giving someone everything. It's about giving them what feels right, what feels honest." Ethan nodded, his eyes warm with understanding. And in that moment I realized that trust wasn't about blindly opening every door, every part of myself. It was about opening up in ways that felt real and meaningful, about sharing the parts of myself that mattered, while still holding on to the strength to protect my own heart. Trust, I had learned, wasn't something you handed over all at once. It was something you built together, one honest moment at a time. As I looked into Ethan's eyes, I felt a quiet certainty settle over me. I wasn't the same person I had been with Tyler, and I was grateful for that. I had grown, learned, and come to understand that true trust, the kind that lasts, isn't something that comes easily or quickly. It's a journey, a balance of vulnerability and strength, and with Ethan, I finally felt ready to walk that path again. In the months that followed, my life with Ethan took on a rhythm I hadn't known I could have again. Our days together unfolded in a way that felt gentle but deep, built on countless small moments that made me feel safe, cherished, and valued. I found myself smiling more, waking up each day with a sense of calm and gratitude. It was like coming home to a place I'd never known, but had always been searching for. Ethan and I shared everything now, not passwords, not unguarded access to every detail of each other's lives, but meaningful moments, stories from our pasts, hopes for the future. He understood my boundaries and I understood his, and we both knew that trust wasn't about prying open every locked door. It was about respecting those doors, understanding that some things were private not out of secrecy but out of personal need. For the first time, I felt like I was in a relationship where my heart and my independence could coexist. And that feeling was priceless. One weekend, we decided to take a short trip to a small cabin by a lake a few hours out of town. The drive was long but peaceful, and with each mile we put behind us, I felt my worries, my memories of Tyler, and even my lingering self-doubt slowly fade into the distance. It was just Ethan and me, a weekend of simplicity with no distractions. No work, no phones, just us, surrounded by the quiet of the lake and the whisper of the trees. We spent our days hiking, talking, and making meals together in the small kitchen of the cabin. In the evenings we would sit by the lake, watching the sunset bleed into the sky, casting golden hues over the water. It was beautiful, the kind of peacefulness that soothed my heart in ways I hadn't realized I needed. As we sat there one evening, Ethan reached for my hand and asked if I'd ever thought about our future. The question surprised me. It wasn't something we'd discussed openly, at least not in concrete terms. I looked at him, searching his face for any hint of expectation or pressure, but there was none. He was simply asking, in that gentle way of his, inviting me to imagine a life where I wasn't afraid to dream again. For so long, my vision of the future had been clouded by fear and distrust, but as I looked at him, I felt a cautious hope blossom within me. "Yes," I replied softly. "I think about it sometimes." He smiled, his eyes warm and steady. "What do you see?" It was a simple question, but one that held so much weight. I hesitated, feeling the stir of emotions that I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. I took a deep breath and let myself speak honestly. "I see us," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "A life together that's simple maybe but real, built on the kind of trust that doesn't need everything laid bare. The kind where we respect each other enough to let each other have our own space, but where we're still fully there for each other." I looked at him, feeling both vulnerable and steady. "I don't want us to be perfect. I just want us to be honest." He squeezed my hand, his face reflecting a depth of understanding that made me feel like I'd finally been heard in a way I never had before. "That's what I want too," he said softly. "I don't need you to be anyone but yourself. I just want us to build something that's real." The days that followed felt like a dream, a beautiful, tranquil dream where I could imagine a future with Ethan without fear or hesitation. And as we left the cabin and headed back to the city, I felt lighter, as though I'd left behind some invisible weight I'd carried for too long. Back in our daily lives, Ethan continued to be my rock. I found myself leaning on him in ways I hadn't thought I could, sharing my thoughts, my hopes, my insecurities. He became the person I trusted most, not because he demanded it, but because he had earned it so fully, so effortlessly. And with each passing day, I felt myself healing, becoming stronger, more open and more confident in the love we were building. But as our relationship deepened, I began to notice something in myself that unsettled me. As much as I loved and trusted Ethan, I couldn't shake the occasional pang of anxiety. It would creep in unannounced, in the quiet moments, a whisper in the back of my mind. What if this was all an illusion? What if I was setting myself up for another heartbreak? The scars left by Tyler had faded, but they hadn't disappeared, and sometimes I would find myself questioning, doubting, even searching for signs of betrayal where none existed. One evening, Ethan noticed my restlessness. We were sitting on the couch, a quiet night in, when he looked at me with that piercing gaze of his and asked, "What's on your mind?" I hesitated, torn between wanting to confide in him and fearing that my insecurities would push him away. But I knew that this was a moment that required honesty, the kind of openness we had promised each other. I took a deep breath and tried to find the right words. "I'm scared," I admitted finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes I feel like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. I know it's not fair to you and it's probably just my own fear talking, but I'm terrified of getting hurt again." Ethan didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked at me, his eyes filled with empathy and understanding. Then he took my hand, holding it gently as though it were something precious. "Thank you for telling me that," he said quietly. "I can't promise that nothing will ever go wrong. Life's messy and I'm far from perfect. But I can promise that I'll always be honest with you. If you ever need reassurance, if you ever feel doubt, just tell me. I want us to be the kind of partners who face those fears together." His words wrapped around me like a warm embrace, calming the storm of anxiety that had been brewing within me. And in that moment, I realized that trust wasn't about erasing all fear or doubt. It was about being willing to face those fears together, to hold each other through the uncertainty and build a foundation that could weather any storm. From that night on, I felt something shift within me. I no longer saw my fears as weaknesses or signs of failure. I saw them as natural parts of the healing process, steps on the journey to building something real. And with Ethan by my side, I felt ready to continue that journey, to face the future with a heart that was cautious but open, guarded yet willing to trust. Over time, we began making plans together, small steps toward a shared future. We talked about moving in together, traveling, even starting a family someday. Each conversation, each plan felt like a victory, a testament to the love and trust we had cultivated. And with each step forward, I felt my heart open a little more, shedding the remnants of the past and embracing the possibilities of a life filled with honesty, love, and genuine connection. Looking back, I realized that Tyler's betrayal, painful as it was, had taught me something invaluable. It had shown me the difference between blind trust and conscious trust, between giving everything away and building something slowly, mindfully, with someone who truly valued me. And as Ethan and I moved forward together, I knew that I was finally ready to love again. Not with naive abandon, but with a strength and wisdom that could weather anything. In Ethan's arms, I had found not just a partner, but a home. A place where trust wasn't a gamble or a sacrifice, but a gift we gave each other, day by day, moment by moment. And for the first time, I felt that I was exactly where I was meant to be, finally free from the shadows of the past, and ready to embrace the beautiful and perfect journey that lay ahead. As the years went by, Ethan and I continued to build our life together. Our relationship was never without its challenges. No real relationship ever is. But each challenge felt like an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to deepen the trust between us. And as our lives began to intertwine even more closely, I discovered something remarkable. I wasn't just healing from the past. I was becoming a stronger, more resilient version of myself. Ethan didn't just fill the gaps left by Tyler. He helped me redefine what I wanted from a relationship, what I truly valued in a partner. We moved in together in a small apartment that overlooked the city skyline. I remember the day we signed the lease, standing on our new balcony, feeling the warm evening breeze as Ethan wrapped his arms around me from behind. Looking out over the city, it felt like a symbol of everything we were building. Our own little world, our shared dreams and hopes growing into something tangible. For the first time in years, I felt like I could truly breathe, like I was home. As the months rolled on, we started to settle into the patterns of daily life together. Mornings were spent in a quiet, comfortable rhythm, Ethan brewing coffee while I scrambled eggs. The two of us sharing sleepy smiles across the kitchen as the sun crept through the windows. We would talk about anything and everything. Our work, our friends, our plans for the weekend. And in those ordinary moments, I found a sense of peace I hadn't known before. A feeling of belonging that I hadn't believed I could find again. But as deeply as I cared for Ethan, a part of me still grappled with insecurities from time to time. They would sneak up on me in unexpected ways. An offhand comment he'd make, a text that came through late at night, or even just a vague feeling of unease that I couldn't quite pinpoint. One evening, I found myself scrolling through his social media, a habit I hadn't indulged in since my time with Tyler. It was as if some old reflex had surfaced, a need to reassure myself that everything was as it seemed. I caught myself mid-scroll, my heart sinking as I realized what I was doing. I didn't want to be that person, the one who snooped, who doubted, who searched for answers in hidden corners. That was the person I had been with Tyler, and it had only led to heartbreak and confusion. I took a deep breath, put down my phone, and decided to tell Ethan what I was feeling, no matter how uncomfortable it was. He was reading on the couch, a book resting on his lap as I sat down beside him. "Can I talk to you about something?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He closed his book and turned to me, his eyes soft and attentive. Of course. What's on your mind? I hesitated, feeling the familiar sting of vulnerability prick at me. Sometimes I still feel that old fear creeping back, I admitted. I don't want to doubt you, but there are moments when I feel insecure, I guess. And it scares me that I might ruin this, that I might bring the past into what we have now. Ethan reached for my hand, holding it gently as he listened. Thank you for telling me, he said quietly. I understand why you feel that way. And I don't think it's something you need to apologize for. You went through a lot, and those feelings don't just disappear overnight. He paused, his gaze steady and filled with warmth. But I want you to know that you can always come to me when you feel that way. I'd rather you tell me than keep it inside. We're a team, remember? Hearing his words, I felt a weight lift off my chest. His patience, his understanding. It was exactly what I needed. And it reaffirmed that I had chosen a partner who valued my emotional well-being as much as his own. From that day forward, I made a conscious effort to trust not just him but myself, to believe in the strength of the person I was becoming. Years continued to pass, each one filled with memories, laughter, and a sense of growth that surprised me. Ethan became more than just my partner. He became my best friend, my confidant, the person who knew me better than anyone else. We traveled together, experiencing new cultures and building a collection of memories that felt like treasures we would cherish for a lifetime. We spent holidays with each other's families, blending our lives in a way that felt seamless and natural. And as the seasons changed, as time moved forward, I found myself envisioning a future with Ethan that was fuller and more beautiful than anything I could have imagined. One winter's night, after a quiet evening at home, Ethan proposed. It wasn't a grand, elaborate gesture. There were no witnesses, no flashy rings, just the two of us in our cozy living room, surrounded by the quiet hum of the city outside. He took my hand, his eyes filled with a love that took my breath away, and asked if I would marry him. I said yes, tears filling my eyes as he slipped a simple, elegant ring onto my finger. It was a moment of pure, unfiltered joy, a promise that we would continue building our lives together, one step at a time. And as I looked at him, at the man who had become my home, my safe haven, I felt a peace settle within me that I hadn't known was possible. Our wedding was small, intimate, held in a sunlit garden with only our closest family and friends. Standing there, holding his hands and looking into his eyes, I felt like I was finally free from the scars of the past, from the fears and insecurities that had once haunted me. I was marrying not just a man, but the life we had created together, the trust we had built from the ground up. In the years that followed, we continued to grow together, our love deepening with each challenge and each joy we shared. There were still moments of doubt, of fear, of vulnerability, but they no longer controlled me. I had learned to trust Ethan, yes, but even more importantly, I had learned to trust myself. I had learned that true trust wasn't about giving everything away. It was about giving honestly, with love and respect, both for him and for myself. Looking back, I realized that Tyler's betrayal, painful as it was, had taught me invaluable lessons. It had shown me that trust was not a currency to be spent recklessly, but a treasure to be shared carefully, with those who valued it as much as I did. And with Ethan, I knew I had found a love that honored that treasure, a love that was built not on perfection, but on a deep, unbreakable bond. And as we built our life together, through the highs and the lows, the joys and the hardships, I knew that I had finally found what I had always been searching for. A love that was real, grounded, and true. A love that had been worth every tear, every heartbreak, every hard-earned lesson. And in that love I had found myself again, whole and free, ready to embrace whatever the future held, with Ethan by my side. As Ethan and I embarked on married life, I found that every day brought new depths to our relationship. Marriage didn't change who we were or make our love suddenly perfect, but it did solidify the foundation we'd carefully built over the years. With him, every experience, big or small, became richer. I started to realize that real love wasn't found in grand gestures or idealized promises. It was in the daily acts of kindness, patience, and quiet understanding that we shared. One of the biggest shifts came a year into our marriage when we started talking seriously about having children. The idea had always been in the back of our minds, something we spoke of in future terms, but now it felt tangible, real, like the natural next step in our journey. And yet, as much as I wanted to expand our little family, a small part of me hesitated. uncertain about whether I could truly let myself be vulnerable in such a profound way again. Becoming a mother felt like opening myself up to a whole new kind of love. A love that was boundless, without conditions or guarantees, where I would be putting my heart in the hands of someone else, just as I had with Ethan. The idea of it was both exhilarating and terrifying, and I couldn't shake the fears that crept into my mind late at night. What if I wasn't ready? What if I wasn't enough? When I shared my fears with Ethan, he listened without judgment, gently reminding me that fear was a natural part of growth. "You're going to be a wonderful mother," he told me one night, his hand resting on mine as we lay in bed. "And whatever challenges come our way, we'll face them together. You don't have to carry this alone." His words stayed with me, calming my heart in ways I hadn't expected. He'd always had a way of grounding me, of reminding me that I was never alone in my fears or insecurities. And so, after months of quiet conversations, dreams, and reassurances, we decided we were ready. A few months later, I found out I was pregnant. The news was surreal, and I spent those first few days caught between joy and disbelief, constantly placing a hand on my belly as if to remind myself that it was real. Ethan was overjoyed, his excitement contagious, filling our home with a warmth and energy that seemed to permeate every corner. We spent hours talking about names, imagining who our child would become, what their laughter would sound like, what kind of person they would grow to be. But along with the joy came a deep sense of responsibility. I was growing a new life, one that depended on me for everything. There were days when the weight of it all felt overwhelming, days when I would question myself, wondering if I could be the kind of mother I wanted to be. Yet, with each moment of doubt, Ethan was there, his unwavering support a constant reminder that I didn't have to be perfect. I just had to be present, to show up, and to love with everything I had. As my pregnancy progressed, we started preparing our home, transforming the spare bedroom into a nursery filled with soft colors and warm light. Ethan painted the walls himself, spending hours making sure each stroke was perfect. I would watch him from the doorway, feeling a swell of love and gratitude as he worked, his face set in concentration, his hands steady and careful. He took care of every detail, from assembling the crib to choosing the perfect mobile, and his dedication only deepened my love for him. The months seemed to pass in a blur, and before we knew it, we were in the hospital waiting to meet our baby. The birth was a whirlwind of emotions, a mixture of fear, excitement, and awe, and when I finally held our daughter in my arms, I felt a wave of love so powerful that it left me breathless. She was tiny, perfect, her eyes wide and curious, and in that moment I knew that everything I had been through, all the pain, all the heartache, had led me to this. Bringing our daughter home was a transformative experience. The world suddenly felt both larger and smaller, filled with new possibilities and responsibilities. Ethan and I were no longer just partners. We were parents, a team tasked with raising a little girl who would one day grow into her own person. It was a role we took seriously, pouring ourselves into every moment, every decision, every bedtime story and lullaby. Those early days were a beautiful blur, a delicate balance of sleepless nights and quiet, tender moments. I would watch Ethan with our daughter, marveling at the way he held her, the way he spoke to her with a gentleness I had never seen before. He was patient, loving, and completely devoted, and in those moments I felt like the luckiest person in the world. But as joyful as those days were, they weren't without challenges. Parenthood tested us in ways we hadn't anticipated, bringing to the surface old insecurities, fears, and moments of exhaustion that stretched us to our limits. There were nights when we would sit together in the nursery, our daughter finally asleep, and talk about our fears, our doubts, our hopes for the future. And each time we would come back to the same promise, that we would face it all together, that we would be there for each other no matter what. As our daughter grew, so did our family. A few years later, we welcomed a second child, a son, who brought with him a new kind of joy, a fresh wave of love that expanded our hearts in ways we hadn't known were possible. Our days became busier, filled with the sounds of laughter, the pitter-patter of little feet, and the quiet moments that made life feel rich and complete. Through it all, Ethan and I continued to grow together, navigating the complexities of marriage and parenthood with the trust and love we had cultivated over the years. Our lives were far from perfect. We had our arguments, our misunderstandings, moments when life felt overwhelming. But each challenge only reinforced the strength of our bond, reminding us of the journey we had taken to get here, of the love that had carried us through it all. Looking back, I realized how far I had come, how much I had learned and grown. The pain and betrayal of the past had once seemed insurmountable, a weight I thought I would carry forever. But now it felt like a distant memory, a chapter that had shaped me but no longer defined me. I had found a love that was real, a family that filled my life with purpose, and a partner who was truly my equal, my friend, my other half. As the years went on, I found peace in the ordinary moments, in family dinners, in quiet evenings spent reading on the couch, in the warmth of our children's laughter echoing through the house. I no longer needed grand gestures or perfect promises. I had found everything I needed in the quiet, steady love that Ethan and I shared. A love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger, deeper, and more beautiful than I could have ever imagined. In the end, I realized that trust wasn't about never experiencing betrayal. It was about finding the courage to heal, to open my heart again, to believe in love despite the risks. And as I looked at my family, at the life we had built together, I knew that every step of the journey, every tear, every doubt had been worth it. I had found a love that was true, a love that I could trust with every part of me, and that, I realized, was the greatest gift of all. As I looked at my family, the life we had built together filled me with a sense of gratitude that was almost overwhelming. Ethan sat across from me at the table, helping our daughter with her homework, his face a picture of patience and kindness. Our son, curled up in my lap, clutched his favorite book, waiting for me to read to him. It was a simple moment, but it held all the beauty and meaning I had ever hoped to find. In those quiet, ordinary minutes, I knew that the journey had come full circle. The betrayal, the heartache, the countless nights spent questioning myself, they were now distant memories, faint echoes that had faded in the presence of the love I had found. I no longer needed answers or closure from the past because the present had given me everything I needed. I had discovered the strength within myself to rebuild, to trust again, and to open my heart, not blindly but wisely, to someone who valued it as much as I did. My life was filled with the kind of love that didn't demand perfection, that wasn't based on illusions or ideals. It was a love rooted in kindness, resilience, and the mutual respect Ethan and I had fostered over the years. Together we had created a home filled with warmth and laughter, a safe haven where trust was nurtured, not taken for granted. As I held my son close and looked over at my daughter and Ethan, I felt a peace that was rare and precious. I had finally come home to myself, and that was more than enough.